There is a detail from this year's NFL draft that has stayed with me in a way I did not fully anticipate, and it has nothing to do with any pick, any trade, or anything that happened inside a war room. It is the image of a brother in a hotel hallway, extending his checkout for the second time, then the third, because leaving felt like a betrayal he could not bring himself to commit. Day after day, round after round, waiting for a phone call that kept not coming. That image, quiet and unglamorous and completely absent from the broadcast coverage, tells you more about what actually happened during this draft than anything the analysts said on television. And the person at the center of all of it, Shedeur Sanders, just sitting there through every passing hour, every silent round, every public verdict delivered without a word. Composed, unbothered on the surface, refusing, with everything he had, to give anyone the breaking point they were clearly waiting to witness. That is what I want to talk about, because I think the football world is only beginning to understand the full weight of what it actually watched. Most people experience the NFL draft as a celebration, and it is, for the players whose names get called early, for the families in the green room watching the commissioner walk toward them with a handshake and a hat, and a moment that becomes the photograph on the wall for the rest of their lives. Round 1 is easy to watch. The emotion is clean, and the stories write themselves, and everybody goes home feeling like they saw something worth seeing. But the real character examination, the one that actually tells you something permanent and meaningful about a person, that does not happen in round 1. It happens when round 1 ends without your name, when round 2 passes, when you are sitting there, and 3 has bled into 4, and 4 into 5, and every hour has become its own kind of quiet devastation, a public verdict on your worth delivered through the absence of sound rather than the presence of anything. That is the test. That is where you actually find out who someone is. And what Shedeur Sanders showed the football world across those hours is something that people with genuine standing in this league are now openly naming and refusing to let go quietly. Jarvis Landry was one of the first to say it publicly, and when someone who has operated at his level for as long as he has speaks directly about a young player's draft experience, it carries weight that is different from commentary. Landry has been in this league long enough to understand how the machinery works around draft season, how young prospects get evaluated and managed and sometimes deliberately handled in ways that serve organizational interests rather than honest football assessment. What he said about Shedeur hit me the moment I heard it. He said Shedeur never received a fair shot, not as a general sentiment, as a specific and grounded claim about the pre-draft interview process and the nature of what was being asked in those rooms. Let me be precise about what that means, because I think people have moved past it too quickly. These pre-draft interviews are supposed to be football evaluations, scheme comprehension, processing speed under pressure, situational decision-making, a quarterback's ability to articulate what he sees and why he makes the choices he makes. That is what legitimate evaluation looks like at this stage of the process. What Landry described was something categorically different. Questions engineered not to understand Shedeur's football mind, but to destabilize him personally. To pressure him into saying something damaging about his father, to manufacture the appearance of conflict between him and the coaching staff he was about to work with, or the teammates he had not yet met. The goal was not assessment. The goal was provocation. Get him to say something that could be clipped, circulated, and used as after-the-fact justification for decisions that had already been made on the basis of something entirely removed from football. Once you understand that framing, the draft slide does not look the same anymore. It stops looking like a collective football judgment rendered by 32 independent organizations evaluating the same evidence and arriving at similar conclusions. It starts looking like something else, something that requires a different kind of examination. Here is what makes it genuinely remarkable. Shedeur did not take a single piece of bait, not in one room, not across any of those conversations. He went through every one of those meetings and walked out having given the people across the table nothing they could weaponize. He protected every relationship that mattered. He protected his own reputation through pure composure and intelligence in moments designed to produce the opposite outcome. Landry called it being well prepared, and preparation is certainly part of it. But I want to push further than that, because preparation handles the questions you see coming. What Shedeur demonstrated was something rarer and harder to manufacture through any amount of coaching or rehearsal: the ability to stay completely grounded under questioning, specifically constructed to make groundedness impossible. That is not a skill you develop in a meeting room. That is character. And character either holds under pressure or it reveals itself as something less than it appeared to be. His held, completely, without visible effort. Landry also addressed the question of whether the experience damaged Shedeur mentally, and the way he answered it told me everything. He was not gently reassuring. He was almost impatient with the premise of the question, the way someone is impatient when they are being asked to validate a concern they find genuinely groundless. He said Shedeur is a confident player, and the tone behind those words was not encouragement, it was description. That confidence is not branding. It is not the curated projection of someone managing his public image carefully. It is the load-bearing structure underneath everything Shedeur does on and off a football field. Landry's point was clear, and I think it is the most important football point anyone has made about this situation. That exact confidence, unbroken and fully intact, is what got Shedeur to this level. And the idea that he should somehow modulate it or soften it or make it more palatable for the people who were made uncomfortable by it, that is exactly the wrong lesson to draw from everything that happened. The confidence does not need to apologize for existing. It needs to be pointed at a football field in Cleveland and let off the leash. Leonard Fournette came into this from a completely different angle, and his perspective adds something I find genuinely moving. He talked about the TCU game specifically, that Colorado game, and described it as the moment his casual awareness of Shedeur became genuine investment. He went from knowing about the situation to staying up until 1 in the morning watching Colorado games with the kind of total attention you reserve for things that have personally gotten to you. That is not obligatory solidarity from someone in Shedeur's extended orbit. That is a professional athlete watching another athlete perform and being authentically, involuntarily compelled by what he sees. Fournette confirmed what anyone who watched those Colorado seasons with honest eyes already understood. Those games were appointment viewing not because of the spectacle surrounding the program, not because of the cameras and the celebrity and the cultural noise, but because of the actual football happening in the middle of all that noise. Because of how Shedeur operated when the defense was loaded and the game was tight and the situation was designed to expose whatever limitations existed in his game. He delivered. Consistently. In exactly the moments where a player's true ceiling announces itself. And then there is Deion Sanders Jr. His account of what the draft days actually felt like from inside that hotel room is the most emotionally unguarded and revealing piece of this entire story, and I want to give it the space it deserves. This is Shedeur's older brother, someone physically present through all of it. And he is describing those hours now with a rawness that cuts through every layer of media framing around this situation. Junior had planned to be there for day one. One day, the first round, and then day one ended without Shedeur's name, so he extended his stay. Day two came and went the same way. He just kept not leaving, not because his schedule allowed it, but because walking out of that hotel felt like something he was not capable of doing. You do not leave your brother in that. You just do not. And the word he used when describing what he was feeling was not frustration. It was not anger, though those things were certainly present beneath the surface. He said pain. That specific, heavy, helpless kind of pain that settles into you when someone you love is going through something publicly difficult, and there is nothing, not a single action available to you that will stop it or speed it past them or take any portion of it onto yourself. That is what Junior was sitting with while round after round scrolled past without resolution. He talked about reaching for his phone to text Shedeur and then stopping, staring at the screen, not knowing what words would be right, not wanting to say something that somehow made the weight heavier by drawing more direct attention to what was unfolding in real time. But feeling that impossible pull anyway, because silence in a moment like that can feel like its own kind of abandonment, even when you are present, even when you are right there. I think most people who have ever sat helplessly while someone they love went through public pain understand that tension exactly. There are no right words, and yet the instinct to reach toward them anyway is almost overwhelming because doing nothing feels unbearable. What shifted the entire texture of Junior's account was the moment he described when his understanding of what was happening began to change. At a certain point, when round after round kept advancing and the slide kept extending beyond any distance that football evaluation alone could explain, it stopped registering as a setback inside his mind and started feeling like something operating on a different and larger frequency. He referenced the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, and I want to be careful not to let that get absorbed as rhetorical decoration, because I do not think that is what it was. The idea that obstruction and resistance sometimes serve a purpose that is completely invisible from inside the moment. That sometimes the door being slammed repeatedly and publicly against someone is not the final verdict on that person's worth or direction. It is the architecture of a story that could not have been constructed any other way, a story that required exactly that specific weight and that specific public witness to mean what it is ultimately going to mean. And then Junior said the thing that I believe will frame how people look back on this entire episode years from now. He said the plan backfired. Whatever was operating behind the scenes during those days, whatever combination of coordinated resistance or individual decisions that compounded into something larger, the actual effect was the precise opposite of what any of it might have intended to produce. Rather than diminishing Shedeur's public profile, the slide amplified it. Rather than cooling the league's investment in watching his career develop, it created investment where none previously existed. People who had been neutral, people who had been mildly skeptical, people who had spent months building and distributing cases against his readiness, watched round after round pass and crossed a line they had not planned to cross. They started wanting him to succeed, not because they were already in his corner, but because what they were watching felt fundamentally wrong in a way that activated something real and not easily dismissed. Junior described watching players across multiple locker rooms, people with no prior personal connection to Shedeur, become actively invested in his success simply because of what they witnessed during those draft hours. People who had been publicly critical shifted visibly and in real time as the rounds advanced. Major platforms changed the tone of their coverage mid-draft, and Junior's read on all of it is that this produced a net outcome that is genuinely more valuable for Shedeur's career than a celebrated top 5 selection would have provided. The underdog standing he now carries into Cleveland is not assigned, or constructed, or marketed. It was earned publicly, in the most visible and unambiguous way available to a young player entering this league. And for someone with his talent and his specific psychological makeup, that is not a burden. That is accelerant. There was one more thing Junior shared that I think deserves its own moment of attention, because it speaks to something beneath the draft story and beneath the Cleveland situation and underneath all the external noise. He recalled a conversation at a fair in Dallas where the subject of real estate came up. Some version of the financial diversification conversation that gets directed at young athletes at every stage of their development, and Shedeur's response was immediate and left no room for interpretation. He did not care about real estate. Football was what he cared about. Junior's larger point was that people persistently underestimate the depth and singularity of that focus. The genuine, constitutional, life-organizing degree to which Shedeur Sanders is about football in a way that is not common even among elite players who have made it to this level. That kind of focus does not fracture under a difficult draft experience. It does not get redirected by external treatment or media narratives or whatever organizational politics drove certain picks in certain directions. It finds its path and moves through every obstacle because the commitment powering it is not conditional on circumstances being favorable or fair. It does not require the situation to be right before it activates fully. It just runs. What I keep coming back to after absorbing all of these perspectives, what Landry said about the process being rigged against composure, what Fournette said about being unable to stop watching, What Junior said about the hotel and the pain, and the eventual realization that it was going to mean something none of them could fully see in the moment, is how consistent the picture is across every person with genuine proximity to this situation. They are all describing the same human being. A player whose internal confidence is structural rather than performative. A player who does not need external circumstances to cooperate before his self-belief engages. A player whose love for football is an organizing principle of how he actually lives, rather than a talking point deployed for interviews. The composure Shedeur maintained through those pre-draft meetings where the goal was provocation is the same quality that will allow him to stand in a hostile road stadium with 80,000 people trying to rattle him and still deliver the throw. The mental steadiness he showed while watching himself fall past picks that could not be justified on any honest football basis is the same quality that will carry him through a fourth-quarter deficit without that deficit becoming an internal weight that affects the decision-making. These things are not compartmentalized. They are the same thing expressed in different circumstances. Character under pressure in one context is character available in every context. The draft process, for all its ugliness and all the pain it produced in that hotel room, did something accidentally revealing. It put Shedeur Sanders through one of the most visible public pressure tests available to a young player entering this league, and it let every person paying attention see exactly who he is when everything is working against him. He did not break. He did not react in the ways people were clearly hoping he would react. He did not give anyone the breaking point that would have provided convenient cover for what was happening. He walked through the entire experience and came out the other side carrying something that no drafted 5th overall narrative could have built for him. He carries genuine, widespread, hard-earned public investment from across the league, from veterans who respect what they witnessed, from players in locker rooms who had no prior stake and made a choice about whose story they wanted to see succeed. He carries a brother who stayed in that hotel room past every reasonable checkout time and now looks back at those painful days and sees the opening chapter of something that was always going to be worth the wait. The NFL thought the draft was the verdict. What it actually turned out to be was the setup, and Shedeur Sanders is just now beginning to write the rest of it.